Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a completely custom D&D campaign in real time so that you can see all of the pieces and parts, all the thought processes and questions and brainstorming that goes into building something like this using my methodology. As always, I'm your host, RJ Kerr, and today we're going to be hopefully finishing, fingers crossed, we'll see how many tangents we get on, hopefully finishing our swarm of commoners. A unique stat block to simulate the idea of a rioting crowd in a community. If you are watching us for the very first time or you haven't watched some of the previous episodes, let me go ahead and give you a quick recap to get you caught up on what we've done so far. So, as I mentioned, we're creating our own custom campaign with a completely unique domain of dread. We've gone through and we've decided to use the story circle framework to make sure that we kind of have all the pieces and parts of a good story in this. It's a loose structure for us for a campaign, but it's a useful one. Uh, and we've gone through and started to fill this out. So we have figured out how our characters enter this domain of dread. It's through a portal that opens up on the blood moon, and we figured out what kinds of motivations might draw them into this world. We figured out where they land in a shanty town that we call Darkport, which is on the edge of an inland sea. We figured out this inland sea is a big part of this domain of dread. And that it used to be the basin of a thriving metropolis that has now fallen into ruin and flooded. We also know that this domain of dread has a dread lord that we're calling Ovander, who is an elemental evil of some kind. And we're still figuring out exactly how he fits into the overarching structure of our story here. We have figured out our very first campaign, or our very first adventure, rather, as part of this campaign, where the characters are kidnapped and briefly enslaved and have to escape captivity. And in doing so, they learn about the existence of a long lost artifact that gives the wielder some power over this domain of dread. And they come to understand that this artifact is their best bet for escaping this domain of dread alive. So now we're working on a proactive part of the adventure where our characters are getting out of the world. They're making their own decisions. They're following up their own leads, and they're searching for this artifact. So what we're using is a node structure style here, and really what this does for us is that gives our players a lot of agency. They can follow whatever paths they want to the end, while still giving us as dungeon masters some structure to write this adventure with, so that we're not having to make everything up off the cuff. And so effectively, how this works is that we have a series of nodes, which I prefer to call investigative scenes, because the idea there is that they've got several clues that are laid out, and they for the characters to find. And the characters may find some of these clues, none of these clues, all of these clues, but each of them leads to another node or another investigative scene where there's more clues, and they can branch out from there. And so, it really gives them a lot of options. So we're building pieces and parts of that, the different nodes, the different investigative scenes, and some of those are full-blown adventures, and some of those are more encounter structure style. And so we're building one right now that is more of a complex social encounter. Right? It revolves more around the dynamics between NPCs and the social element there, as opposed to the mechanics. And as part of that, we are developing some obstacles to success. So, with the characters succeeding in their particular quest in this, uh, we are throwing up some roadblocks. So it's not just a series of persuasion or deception or intimidation checks. That really there's a little bit more dynamic element to this. As part of that, we need an angry mob, and so we're working on a stat block to allow us to run an angry mob without having to run every individual commoner in it. And so there's a couple of methodologies for this, and we decided to make it a swarm sort of stat block. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we can jump back into this. Real quick, this is an interactive stream, so as you have comments, questions, concerns, thoughts, ideas, or anything else you want to talk about, jump into the chat. I love hearing from you guys. You come up with some really creative stuff and ask some really insightful questions. So feel free to get active in there. See, we've already got a couple people in. Hey, Mr. X. Hey, Jonathan. Two of our regulars here. Good to see you guys. Um, all right. So last time we did a bunch of work on sort of carving out the our theme, our idea for this creature stat block, and kind of what we were envisioning it would be, and how we would make that come across in game statistics. And so, I was kind of envisioning the idea of this, classic, you know, sort of not necessarily a riot, but this classic angry mob with pitchforks and torches, and descending upon the hapless adventurers, and what that mob might be like. And so we used some of the basic swarm mechanics that are kind of universal to swarm stat blocks in the monster manual. And that was pretty much easy enough to kind of just look up and fill those in. And that was things like the resistances, the immunities, the actual swarm rule here, and then we came up with some special features. Um, Things like crowd press, that at the beginning of the swarm's turn, all creatures of medium size or smaller must take a DC strength saving throw, and we're not sure what that DC is yet. And that under failure, the target creature is knocked prone or pushed back 10 feet, DM's choice. And then the success, the crowd press has no effect on the target. And then we have Lost in the Crowd, which works synergetically with Crowd Press. So if the swarm enters the space of a prone creature, medium size or smaller, that creature must make a strength saving throw or become restrained. While restrained in this fashion, the swarm can move the target creature without any penalty to its movement speed. Additionally, while restrained, the target creature has disadvantage on strength checks to escape. Um, and then we worked in this riot mechanic. Well, another suggestion from you guys here with this idea that, these angry mobs might be throwing things. They might create difficult terrain as they knock down barriers and things like that. And so we set up a condition where the area within 10 feet of the swarm is considered difficult terrain whenever the swarm encounters a movable obstacle to represent obstructions and debris being thrown out of the way. And then we did a little bit of shaping here on some of the attack actions or some of the actions that this swarm can take. Um, and so we haven't fleshed out the mechanics on this yet. That's what we're going to do today. Is we're going to talk a little bit about where to pull these numbers from and how to keep them balanced. But we had another flavor element here again, suggested by you guys here, where it's the Rotten Tomatoes mechanic, where the swarm targets one creature within 20 feet. That creature must make a dexterity saving throw or become blinded. We should put a note about that. Become blinded by thrown rotting vegetables until the end of their next turn. And then we have a trample weapon here as well, or I should say a trample attack here as well. So today, now that we kind of have the shape of what we're looking for thematically fleshed out, we've got the idea that we're trying to create conveyed here. It's time to start getting some of the numbers that we need in place. We briefly mentioned this last time. We're going to spend some more time looking into it today. The 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide has a really strong section on this. Frankly, I think that it's a much stronger section on monster creation than exists in the 2024 DMG. Although I'm a big fan of the 2024 DMG. So we're going to be referring to that today, where I have up on a side screen here. I've got Chapter 9, creating a monster, or creating monsters. I'm sorry, it is creating a monster. Chapter 9, creating a monster, open on the 2024 DMG. So what we're going to do here is you scroll down, there's monster statistics by challenge rating. And this table gives gives some sort of average numbers depending on what kind of challenge rating we want to choose for our particular creature here. And so the first step that I approach on this is I try to figure out what kind of challenge rating I'm going for here. That way that way I can kind of work within these numbers to really kind of balance out this creature. And I have found that um, these numbers, this block, even though it was developed for the 2014, it still works really well with the 2024 rules, or at least in my experience, it tends to work pretty well. Um, all right, so before we dig into that, looks like we've got a couple comments here. Mr. Mex says, throw cucumbers to trigger the stun condition. During the process, we've had so many different options. They might actually be a D6 table of what the crowd does on any round. Yeah, and you could go that route. I mean, you have things like, I want to say it's not I think it's like the spectator stat block. Don't quote me on that, but that you've got to make checks on to see what kind of eye stock it shoots, that kind of deal. But yeah, we could absolutely do that for this creature here, and so and add some variability to it, make different crowds very different. You also could hold some. We could also hold on some of these ideas and then reskin elements of this as necessary to make these crowds more unique, depending on where we use them again. I really like the idea of us having lots of angry mobs in the Domain of Dread. I just think that could be a really fun thing. Um, so, to get us started here, I am going to come over to the. There's two tools I'm going to use. I'm going to use the. So we've already talked about the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. As what we're going to use to kind of pick and massage out these numbers here. But we also are going to want to refer to the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide and the 2024 Monster Manual to pick what kind of challenge rating we're looking for here. Specifically because in this instance, we're looking for a stat block that is usable against a group of presumably second level adventurers. That's where we're guessing they're going to be by the time they reach this encounter. So we're going to want to find a challenge rating that's suitable for that level of play. So to do that, we need to figure out kind of what our XP budget is for this kind of encounter based off of how difficult we want it to be. And so we're going to go to Chapter 4, Creating Adventures, and under Plan Encounters, the Combat Encounters section of the 2024 DMG. And we're going to kind of follow some of the steps there. We're going to decide whether we want this to be a low difficulty, a moderate difficulty, or a high difficulty adventure. Or encounter, I should say, not adventure. And so we're going to do some math to figure that out here. But first, we are also going to want to look in the Monster Manual to see our range of what CR translates to what XP. So we can go to the Monsters entry section in there and scroll on down until we get to challenge rating, and it's got a handy little table that tells us that challenge rating of 1/8 is 25 XP, 1/4 is 50 XP, 1/2 is 100 XP, that kind of thing. So we can convert our budget into an appropriate challenge rating. And then the last thing that we're going to want to do, specifically for, since we're building this for a specific encounter, something we might want to do to really kind of refine this number specifically is for that encounter is we may want to go ahead and account for the Acolyte stat block as well in this encounter. That being said, we are kind of making this as we want to make the stat block as universal as possible. We want to make it something that we can use in a variety of situations. So we may or may not worry about that. We may just kind of rough it out a bit so that it's around a reasonable CR, and then we can massage the encounter to include the Acolyte in some fashion without making it too extreme. All right. Oh, hey, welcome to the chat, Fantasy Animal Vegan. Okay, so um, let's see here. Jonathan Ross says strength 25, dex 3, con 25, intelligence 3, wisdom 3, charisma 3. uh, yeah, so I'll be honest with you, the ability scores are something, one of the last things that I usually adjust when I'm creating a monster, because some of these other numbers are gonna affect some of that. But we'll touch on that. So, regardless, so I've got these tables open here, and we are working on figuring out uh, what our sort of our XP pool is here. Um, since we're looking to kind of divide this up, let's go ahead and we're going to say this is a moderate. We're gonna use the numbers for a moderate difficulty encounter, and so against um, against four level 2 characters. That would be 150 XP per character, and so now we're looking at about a budget of about 600 XP. So we want to decide what fraction of that we really want to hit uh, with these creatures here. So, for moderate encounter, I think about things like Xanathars, where they did some charts where it was, a ratio of CR to character level, and so there's some that are like 1 to 1, some that are like 2 to 1, that kind of deal. And I generally like to think of maybe a moderate encounter being somewhere around the idea of 1 to 1, especially this low level. So I think what that means that we're really going to be looking for here is probably a CR 1/2, because that's going to give us 100 XP here, and so that means that we could have six on the 4 here, so it's a little bit larger. But that also gives us some budget for things like an acolyte and to add some other elements to this. If we made it a CR 1, it would bump the XP up to 200, which means we'd be looking at about 3 of these monsters for a medium encounter here, which again isn't bad. Um, but for I think that for kind of variability's sake, um, let's start with the 1/2 CR and 100 XP, and let's see where that takes us. We can always change it as we need to. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to put 1/2 as my target CR and 100 XP. Um, One of the things that we can do too with this is we've seen a lot of this in the new 2024 Monster Manual, where there's a scaling of creatures to make them more viable at higher levels. So we might even end up changing the name of this to make it, it's a small swarm of commoners, and then we have a large swarm of commoners, and then we have a massive swarm of commoners, and so we might even change this size from huge to large. Although spatially, I think huge makes a little more sense for what we're going at here. That's okay. We'll come back to that. So now we have our challenge rating set up here. We can go back to our 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide, which for some reason has scrolled me all the way back up to the top of that section. And I'm having to scroll all the way down to the chart. Here we go. There is, if you're following along, if you have the 2014 Monster Manual, I'm not Monster Manual, Dungeon Master's Guide, you can see that there's a line here that's got for the 1/2 challenge rating, and it talks about that the typical proficiency bonus is +2. Cool. We can go ahead and add that in. The typical armor class is 13. Hit points are in a range of 36 to 49. Attack bonus is generally +3, and damage per round is usually 4 to 5. 4 to 5 points with a DC 13 saving throw. So what we could do here then is we can stick to these numbers if we want, but we can also flex them a little bit here. So if your defense is a little bit lower, your attack can be a little bit higher. If your attack is a little bit lower, your defense can be a little bit higher. That kind of thing to kind of so you're not having to stick straight to that set of numbers. Um, oh, and I drifted a line here. I misquoted the hit points and the damage per round. Sorry. Hit points are 50 to 70, and damage per round is 6 to 8 for the 1/2. I was looking at the 1/4, unfortunately. But we can massage the numbers so they kind of stay relatively within this range, making it very easy for us to do. Especially since this is a group of commoners, and the idea here is that commoner stat block is you know it's tens all around. So whatever modifications we're making is based off of the number of people that are involved in this. The sheer volume of them is what gives them their strength. So let's go ahead and put 13 up as the armor class because I think that works for us here. We're going to go ahead and get rid of the type of armor there because we're just going to say that effectively it's harder to hit some of them than it would be a regular commoner because there's just a lot of them there. They're defending each other, that kind of thing. The hit points, we will do a little massaging on here because it's going to be affected by the Constitution ability score as well. And so again, we're looking for that 50 to 70 range. Now, the die is determined typically by the size of the creature. So whether it's medium, large, huge, what have you. One thing that we want to check on here, just to kind of make sure that we're running in the same vein, is we're going to look up a swarm stat block again. And we're going to see if they're using the actual, I think they use the actual die for the swarm size as opposed to the actual creature's size. And yes, they do. Okay, cool. So like a swarm of insects is a medium swarm of tiny beasts, and so they use the D8 for the hit points because it's medium. Huge is going to be a different size. So we're going to go back to our 2024 monster manual, and we are going to scroll down through the parts of a stat block section here and go to the hit points section where it tells us what die we're going to use for the hit points by size. In this case, we got a huge, so we're using a D12. So we're going to head and start down on that there. Jonathan Frost says, Bard subclass, the Rabble Rouser, gets a crowd swarm as a companion. Summonable, of course. Yeah, of course. They just started to play music. What was it? I'm gonna get off course here. If you've ever heard of Listomania, there was a composer at one point who was so wildly popular that they dubbed sort of the hysteria that would break out around his concerts as Listomania because his name was Liszt, and it was like you've seen the same kind of thing with the Beatles, right? But it was sort of the first first iteration of that. I could absolutely see a bard being able to summon crowds of hysterical followers for that. Somatic, Mr. Mex's somatic and material component is one throne chair. Yeah, depending on the genre, right? Depending on the genre of the bard. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue working on the hit points here. This is gonna be some math for us, guys. There's just no way around it. The the average hit points are influenced by the average die here, right? If you want to come up with whatever the average value of a particular die is, you add the lowest value to the highest value and you divide by 2, right? So in this case, it's for a D12, it's going to be 6.5 per die here. Now we know from our block here that having a range of 50 to 70 hit points is kind of what we want to target there. 60's pretty smack dab in the middle there. Um, and maybe we make it 70 to make them um, a little stronger. Maybe we make it closer to 50 and make them a little bit weaker. So we could massage the Constitution score and give them a bonus here, uh, or we could raise the number of die. Um, and so that'll come down to a decision of how physically tough do we think uh, a, uh, a swarm is, an angry mob is. Um, I'm gonna say that I think that they would be tougher than just your standard common or your average constitution here, just by the sheer volume of numbers, the ability for some people in the back to fall back and some people to come up front, or some people in the front to fall back and some people in the back to come up front. Um, so I think we need to give this at least a plus of some kind. So um, I don't think it needs to be huge though. So maybe we make it a 13. Gives us a +1. And this is where this stuff becomes more art than science, is we're just kind of feeling our way through some of this. Um, so that means that for every D12 that we pick, we're going to have a +1 on that. So that brings our average up to 7.5 for this, which means we're going to want to be looking for a number less than 10, because that would be 75 if we multiply by 10. So, well, yeah, so that is going to be, let's try 7.5. Let me get this a little lower so you can definitely see it. Let's try 7.5 times 8. Let's see what that gives us. That gives us 60 straight out. Okay, that's not bad. That's square in the middle, so maybe we do that. But let's just double check 6. Yeah, so 7.5 times 9 is going to be 67.5. You would round. Typically in D&D, you round down. I especially tend to do that for monster stat blocks because it's always better for them to have um, a little bit lower hit points as opposed to a little bit higher, or at least in my opinion, it is. So that being said, I think 60 is pretty smack dab in the middle of this. So why don't we do this as 8, and then that becomes 8, and this becomes 60. Reasonable amount of hit points for a huge swarm of medium-sized creatures. Let's say we can deal with their passive perception as well. Um, So I know that the Jonathan, you were making a joke with intelligence 3, wisdom 3, charisma 3, but that does kind of get us thinking about the nature of an angry mob, right? And what these ability scores actually refer to. Um, so intelligence is their ability to take in new information, right? That's effectively what it is. Take in new information and learn from it. Wisdom is their ability to intuit and trust their senses. Charisma is their not so much how much they can um, not necessarily how attractive they are or how or eloquent they are. It's really about the force of one's personality, um, and the strength of that personality. So I think that an angry mob like this, who is unlikely to be swayed against their sort of core objective, their collective personality from this, is likely has a higher constitution than 10. Since they have got more eyes and ears, they probably have a slightly higher wisdom than 10 here. But since you know people get, dumb in crowds, they probably have a lower intelligence than normal. Um, so I would say the charisma of the three here, charisma is probably the highest, wisdom is probably in the middle, and intelligence is probably lower here. So I would make this one a little bit tougher here. So we'll do a +1. I would maybe make this one a +2. And then let's turn this into an 8 and make that a -1. To suggest that they're not, wild animals, but at the same time, uh, you know, they're not terribly, intelligent as they're sort of whipped up into this froth. Reasoning with them would be very difficult. Um, and again, we may massage those numbers a little bit, but that's kind of where I would just I would strike out with this. I'd start with. So let's go ahead and give them, that would make their passive perception 11, because 10 plus their wisdom here. So again, it's a pretty reasonable number. It's a little higher than average. It's a little higher than 10, but it's not so high that the characters couldn't slink past an angry mob, because they certainly could be distracted and kind of focused on what they're doing and missing things. The angry mob, that is. Cool. So we've got a fair amount of this already filled out here. We might decide if we want to give them some skills. We might decide that we want to give them, well, resistances to. We could say something along the lines of, resistances to being intimidated or persuaded or something like that. But I think that's covered by the charm immunity and the frightened immunity. They're not going to be cowed as easily, or swayed as easily. So let's head on down here to our damage types here. So far, we've been pretty squarely in the middle. Sorry, just saw Jonathan's. Now I'm getting the mummy vibes with the Imhotep, or the Imhotep mobs, not the Tom Cruise one. Yeah, of course. When we talk about the mummy, we were obviously talking about the Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz. Come on. I mean, I think that goes without saying. But yeah, actually, to be completely honest with you, that kind of feel, is I think is a really useful guide for this. Is that idea of the mob sort of kind of washing over everything and forcing this group to flee. It even there's even the scene where the museum curator is sort of overcome by the mob and swept aside in doing that, and that's exactly the kinds of scenes that we want to build. And one of the things that I think gets lost in the shuffle when you're making creatures is sometimes we get too lost in the stat blocks and the abilities, and we stop thinking about the kinds of stories we want to tell with this creature and the kinds of moments we want to create. And so I try to keep that in mind when I'm creating new creatures. Is what sort of story are they going to be involved in? What kind of moments am I trying to build with this? And that sort of moment for the mummy is 100% the kind of thing that I would like to build with this sort of stat block. Okay, so let's move down to our DCs here. Nice thing with this chart here is that it's going to tell us that the typical DC for a save DC for a CR 1/2 monster is 13. So we can just go ahead and fill in all of those X's with 13, and make that nice and simple. DC 13, put a space in there. So just kind of plug that in, and that makes things pretty straightforward. Mr. Max says, would the mom be more focused on one party member of the others? Like, will they bypass the ones not carrying the priest voice if it's contained in something? Um, that's really up to the discretion of the dungeon master. Part of is part of this encounter. Um, it would make sense to me that they're more focused on that individual if they have the knowledge of that, right? Because said container, and in this case, I think we went with something along the lines of a contract, right? That kind of binds this voice. Um, that can be tucked away in a bank. The crown doesn't have perfect knowledge of the of what characters in possession of what, and the acolyte might not either. And so it may just be a bring me all the sinners, and uh, we'll let God sort out the rest. That sort of methodology here. Um, and you could go either way on that. If they do know that, then if they have that information, then yeah, I think it would make sense they would focus on that one since that's their objective, that PC since that's their objective. Um, that's something that we'd have to play out as part of the game and in the moment, as opposed to planning for it ahead of time. Um, okay, so let's go ahead now and jump into our our attacks here. I'm just looking at this. Wonder if. Well, no. Okay. Um, I was gonna say maybe we should give them more than one torches and pitchforks attack, but I think with the math and damage per round, it's not gonna sort out very well like that, especially since we're kind of doing both piercing and fire damage as a part of this. So let's go ahead and fill in what we know on this. So again, the attack bonus is pretty straightforward. It's a +3 typically, and so we just kind of put that in there. We've already have our reach on this is a swarm thing. It's 0 feet. The swarm's got to be on somebody to use their attack. That being said, I wonder if we should change the range on the torches and pitchforks to 5 feet, because you could have sort of the front line of the mob attacking. They don't necessarily have to be all over that, and keep the trample at 0 feet. I kind of like that. I think I like that. I think it's a little more thematic, so we'll do that. Still have to be a melee range, but it gives them a little more versatility. And also, their trample attack, they can only use on a prone target, right? So there's some limitation to that. So since we're looking at a damage of 6 to 8 damage per round, all right, and we're going to assume that they're going to hit every round. When we kind of do this math, is we're gonna make the assumption they're gonna hit every round. We're not going to account for misses when we do this. There are some guidelines for if they have limited use sort of attacks and how that affects things. I really think that kind of stuff really becomes important if you're doing things like a breath weapon, like a dragon's breath weapon or something along those lines. That it's a big, heavy hitting attack that really kind of skews the damage, and they're only going to be able to do that, over the course of so many rounds. What we're going to do in this case is we're just going to kind of use these straight numbers. We've got piercing, we've got fire damage here. We're looking at 6 to 8 damage, so we probably want to go with D4s for this. The average on that then being 2.5, meaning that we're gonna, probably if we add 1 to each of them, that's going to bring us up to a 7. That's good in the range there. That's pretty legit. So we're going to say 1d4 plus 1, and then 1d4 plus 1 fire damage. That makes, well, we would round down in this, then make it that 3. Yeah, that's all right. It's still 6. It's still within the range there. We could bump that up too, make it a +2. Let's do that. Let's make that a +2 because I think the mob's going to be a little bit stronger than that, just by the sheer weight of them. So that gets rounded up to 4, as does that, and it does effectively 8 damage per round, right at the top end here. So I'm just using the torches and pitchforks as the main attack here. Since the trample is a little more niche. I think it should be extra damage, and I don't really worry about building it into the damage per round for this because it's still going to be relatively light in terms of damage. So one of the things that we could do here then is still to kind of keep this in the ballpark of what we're working on, is we could make this. We know this is going to be a +2, right? Because this is all strength-based attacks we've got here. We don't have any finesse attacks. We don't have any ranged attacks. So we know that's going to be a +2, which means that if we want to kind of target a reasonable number over here, we could make this a D10. Do a 1d10 there. We could also make this 2d4. And both of those would come out to 7. I think 2d4 kind of works well on this. The advantage of doing 2d4 over a 1d10 is that, you can't get any lower than a 2 on a 2d4, right? So that means the minimum damage becomes 4 from this trampling as opposed to a minimum damage of 3 if we did a 1d10. Which still, ultimately doesn't feel like it's a ton of damage, but, the idea here isn't to one-shot a character. The idea here is to inflict some relatively heavy damage without necessarily wiping them out in one fell swoop. And on the off chance that they get to use this in the same turn, we're talking 15 points of damage on average, which is a pretty heavy hit for a second level character. So I think that's pretty balanced from my point of view here. Couple other questions here. Let's see. Mr. Mex is more line of sight in leading the mob's direction. Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, if the mob is going after somebody who's got the thing that they want, the players absolutely could choose to have their characters have whoever character has it hold it up over the head and be like, over here, I've got it, come follow me, and kind of lead them off on, to lead them away from the rest of the party while the rest escape. Again, that's the kind of thing that you're going to want to leave up to the players to come up with those ideas. It's good to think about that kind of stuff, kind of going ahead and do it, but having but you don't necessarily need to map that out ahead of time because whatever, my experience is that whatever sort of strategy you assume people are going to take, they're going to take something you never came up with. They're going to come up with something that was something you never thought of. So having a few, having thought through a few different avenues will let you maneuver and adjust a little bit better. But it's not something you necessarily need to write out in the adventures that you run. So, Fantasy Animal Vegan says, do they have a special tar and feather ability if their target is grappled? That's one of those things where I feel like it would be like the to the pyre mechanic that we're going to work on into this encounter. I feel like that'd be a special mechanic for a particular encounter if that's the mob's outcome, tar and feathering. But that's it's still really funny. We forgot to change the DC here to 13, so we got that there. And terrific. Okay, so now we just need to adjust our strength and dex scores. I don't think the dex needs to be higher than average. Strength we know is going to be a +2, so we can just pop that up to 15 or 14 or something along those lines. And boom, we've got a custom creature. I mean, the hardest part on this was figuring out sort of the thematic elements of this, and where the math actually comes in pretty simply. And we could get more complicated than that. We could, really lower the armor class or the hit points and ramp up the damage, or vice versa, if that fit a little more thematically into our creature, and create some balance with that. But in this case, we don't necessarily need to do that. So now we've got something that we can have several of these swarms of commoners moving around the table, giving them a little more functionality per turn, and creating the illusion of kind of a flowing mob without us having to run, 100 individual commoners. Now we can run, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 discrete creatures here. It makes it much easier on the DM, on you, and still gives us the flow, the feeling that we're looking for. Fantasy Animal Vegan says Gaston ability. I can already tell I'm gonna like this. Each round, roll a d20. On a 1, a handsome lumberjack of a man appears. The swarm singing and spitting in a spittoon. A flash mob breaks out. For 1 turn, the swarm is stunned. That would be funny. That would absolutely be funny. Yeah, that actually gives me an interesting idea for a campaign at some point. I don't necessarily mean like the actual adventure, but but running a classic sort of like running Curse of Strahd or something like that. But it's a Disney movie theme, right? And so like people do break into dance and sing, and it does disrupt things, and you know the birds and the animals get involved, and I could see I could see running a game like Curse of Strahd that way, with a big Disney vibe. That would be so amusing, so amusing. Um, yeah. Uh, all right. Okay, cool. So we have our swarm of commoners here built out. So now that we've got that, and we know that they are going to be a 1/2 challenger rating, we can go back to our sea shanty siren, scroll back down to our complications, and we can say, we can figure out how many swarms of commoners we're going to have based off of the difference in this acolyte stat block. So let's go ahead and look up what the CR is on an acolyte. Okay, which is now known as the priest acolyte in the 2024. So CR 1/4. Okay, great. So it's 50 XP. That means we can change whether we want this to be a low difficulty, a medium difficulty, or a high difficulty encounter. Let's think about this a little bit. Let's take a step back, and let's see what the ghost is going to be against them. So ghost is a 1,100. It's a challenge rating 4. So this is going to be if they end up fighting the ghost, this is going to be a deadly encounter for them. That's going to be a really difficult one. So we may end up wanting to massage this a little bit too. But we want to bear in mind that this is going to be hard to deadly. And we got to decide whether we want at the same level for the priest and the bard, or whether we want something else, or if we want to reduce this. Um, one of the things that we could do with the widow bit here is, we could come up with something other than, um, you know, uh, something other than violence to resolve this. We could say the ghost is not going to be violent, but they're going to use their possession ability to try to possess a humanoid here, specifically the one that has the voice, or has the contract with the voice in it. And then we could keep this ghost stat block, because there's nothing wrong with putting higher level stat blocks in here, and reminding characters that not everything they encounter in the world is going to be balanced for them specifically. Because I'm a firm believer that you should have some things that are in there that are too hard for your characters to tackle at the level that they're at. Some things that are way too, that are almost trivial for them, and then have some stuff in the middle there as well. Because again, that variation makes them take combat a little more seriously. If everything is always balanced for them, the players are going to come to this expectation that every single fight that they're in is one that they can win, and one that they can win, using conventional means. They don't necessarily have to think outside the box for, or they can take unnecessary risks with. Um, so by varying those difficulties, you create a lot more. Um, uh, yeah, you've got to create. You create a lot more dynamic encounters, and you create more difficult decisions for your party, which really adds to the value of the game. Uh, Jonathan Frost says sometimes you got to run. Cough, cough. Red Wizard. Cough, cough. Yeah, he's referring to one of our games where the party took on a Red Wizard of Thay, and during their first encounter, it did not go too well for the party. Um, so yeah, some of that stuff exists in the world. I mean, a mage is a CR6 creature that's pretty beefy against even third level adventurers, something along those lines. So before we go mucking about with the widow here, let's just make our note that this is a dangerous encounter, and we need to be aware of that going into this. Um, but we could say that doesn't mean that we need to have a hard encounter for the priest. Um, I'm actually more I'm tempted to make this more to keep this a moderate encounter. Um, because again, we're not trying to completely decimate the party. We're not trying to end up in a situation where somebody gets dragged into the pyre and lit on fire. We're um, you know as dynamic as that would be, we really want a situation in which the characters um, are have a reasonable chance at winning. That being said, the counterpoint to this is that you know they're likely to run, right? Because they're not necessarily going to want to fight the whole town. So we could make it a hard encounter, um, with the expectation that we're that really our objective is that we're driving the PCs off, right? They're going to do what they're going to do. We want them to play in their world, but the way that we envision this going is they're getting run out of town by this mob. So maybe we do. Maybe we make it a hard encounter. Why not? Let's do it. Now that I've talked myself into it. All right. So that means our budget for this is going to be 800 XP for a high difficulty encounter of 4 second level characters. So that means uh, the acolyte being 50 here, we would end up with something like 7. I mean, we could go the other way and do 8 plus 50 and be a little over. We can do 7 plus 50 and be a little under, since these are 100. Um, that yeah, that's still a lot of. Hmm. Well, so I was going to say that's still a lot of um, of creatures to run in a given battle. If you've got 8, enemies here, that's a fair amount for the dungeon master to juggle. Now that being said, 8 tends to be kind of my threshold. I find that 8 is manageable. Beyond that, it can really start to slow down gameplay, I think. And so that's where swarms become really useful, and other mechanics become really useful. Um, so I don't think we necessarily need to modify our swarm of commoners in this case, but we're certainly going to want to keep in mind that we're going to need to beef them up if we ever want to use them at higher tiers, because this is going to become a huge, an unwieldy number of them. If we were to say make this an encounter for fifth level characters or something along those lines. Okay, so that being said, we've still got a couple other things we want to kind of add to the pile here. Um, we have the Lady's Ire, the mist that gets involved in this. And that's part of the reason why I would want to go with 7 swarms instead of 8 and err on the side of being a little lower than a high difficulty encounter, because we're going to make it harder on the characters by adding in this mist mechanic. And then, of course, there's the pyre to deal with, which is a whole big bucket of damage. So let's see. Let's go ahead and start working on that. So let's say the Lady's Ire. And I know we're getting close to our time here, but let's at least get this sketched out. And to the pyre. Let's. Ooh. So, again, thinking in scenes, thinking in sort of how this is going to play out. Ben had suggested the Lady's Ire, the idea being that the acolyte can call down this mist. And so, what we could do with this, that is use that mist to obscure the area outside of a certain radius. And so, effectively, everything is heavily obscured X number of feet from any individual character. And then we could use that in such a way that it is disorienting. So, since the characters can't necessarily see where they're going, they might get split up from each other. They might take wrong turns, and it could really kind of divide up the group here. And we could say that the commoners, since they live here, they know these streets like the back of their hands, and the acolyte are unaffected by this mist. And so we could have these looming groups of angry villagers who kind of come out of the mist to attack different characters, and kind of forcing this like running battle along there, where the party might get split up, where they might get lost, they might get turned around. That would be a cool dynamic. So let's say, let's make this thick. Let's say on the first round of combat, we're going to say the first round of initiative. Let's see, on the first round of initiative, the acolyte, who's going to need a name at some point here, speaks a prayer to the Grey Lady. And which way did we spell gray? We said GRA. Okay, so let me correct my spelling here. Excuse me. Speaks a prayer to the Grey Lady, calling down a mist that blankets the town. All Juju inside this mist. Anything beyond a range of 20 feet. We'll say, we'll say beyond a range of 20 feet is lightly obscured, and anything, let's see here, is lightly obscured with and everything beyond, say, 20 feet, not 30, 20 feet beyond that is heavily obscured. So we end up with this sort of, radiating mist effect here kind of deal. And then we can say the locals, say acolytes and swarms of commoners are too familiar with their town to be affected. And actually that refers to a different mechanic I want to introduce in here and say something along the lines of while in the mist, characters must make, well, actually we're going to say creatures must make DC 13 wisdom survival checks every time they move to avoid becoming lost. And we'll want to smooth out the rhetoric on that. Again, if we were writing this for somebody else, we would adjust that, but for ourselves, it's not a huge deal to keep it that way. We know what we mean. Cool. All right, so we got the Lady's Ire all mapped out there. All right, we got a couple of comments here. I've gotten that I've only been watching out of the corner of my eye. So before we close up for the day, we're going to go through this. Let's see here. In reference to the Red Wizard, Fantasy Animal Vegan, I cast Clarendon on the Red Wizard. Yeah, good call. Except you're aiding and abetting the enemy. Come on. They're from Thay. Jonathan cast Murder, Mr. Max. Jonathan cast Murder on the Red Wizard. LOL. Yeah, it kind of did in the game. And Fantasy Animal Vegan, Jonathan would have 100% crit 20 on that. Yep. Mr. Max's comment: I've never seen our group organized before that fight. That organized before the fight. It was like SEAL Team 6 going into that camp. Yeah, so it very much was after you guys got. So for those of you who weren't in that game, it's a Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure, and they got their butts handed to them by the Red Wizard of Thay in there, and decided to go back and get revenge. And it was so organized. It's a real testament to what a D&D party can do when they make a plan and stick to it. It was really impressive. They did a great job. Fantasy Animal Vegan suggests that we call the acolyte Steve. In this background, it's a diver. Hey, when in doubt, why not? It's like, okay, this is a tangent, but I don't know if you've heard about the Tiffany problem. It's this idea that there are plenty of names that existed, back in historical time periods, that to our sort of modern sensibilities seem anachronistic. And Tiffany's one of them. So, for example, Tiffany used to be a popular name in the medieval era, but now we associate the name Tiffany with the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, right? But it's actually an ancient name, but it doesn't sound ancient to us, and so there's all kinds of stuff like that. So you might come up with that. That means that there is absolutely nothing wrong with naming the acolyte Tiffany or something along those lines. All right, so Fantasy Animal Vegan says RJ has incredible focus. Well, we got to make some progress. Every one of these, we got to make some progress. Jonathan says no one was named Tiffany before the 80s. I used to think so too, and I was wrong. Although there will always only be one Tiffany Amber Thiessen. And then Mr. Mex says we scrapped by a few of our fights and then got trounced. We finally had someone step up and take charge, and the guy that slapped us, um, silly, was one of the easier fights in the second the second time. Yeah, well, being coordinated helps. And then Fantasy Animal Vegan says, "Does the medieval Tiffany have a heart over the eye?" You know what? I don't know. At this point, nothing would surprise me. I'll have to do some research and get back to you about the whole heart over the eye thing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching tonight. We're going to go ahead and put a pin in it here. As always, it's been a great time chatting with you guys and working on this adventure and building out something wholly from scratch. I love this unstructured creativity time that I get with you guys. So if you enjoy it just as much as I do, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and all that kind of stuff helps build the channel, helps keep this a very dynamic series, and helps more people find us. In the meantime, if you are interested in jumping into one of my tables, please check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr to find all of my open tables at the moment. If there's not something there that fits your needs or your interests, there is a custom booking option on there where you can request custom adventures, other modules, different times, different dates, one-shots, full campaigns, all that kind of stuff. You can send me a request through there, and we can figure out what we can do for you. Anyway, thanks again, everybody, and I will talk to you all next week. Have a good one.